Just remember this, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Okay, Jesus, but let me ask you a question. Just who is my neighbor? I live in a big mansion with nobody around for miles. Ha ha ha.
Well, listen to my story and then you'll find out. There once was a man walking down an old dusty road. He got beat up by some riders who took his money. Soon came a priest.
Oh, well, I'm sure he helped him. He's a good man.
No, the priest did not help him. Soon, a Levite showed up down the road.
Well, there you go. He must have helped him. Those guys visited my grandma when she was sick.
No, Levite did not help him either. Then came a Samaritan.
This guy's just a lowlife. He won't help.
Actually, the Samaritan did help him. He bandaged up his wounds and took him to an innkeeper. He gave the innkeeper 2 denarii.
Take these. Take these. Give him medicine and whatever he needs. If this doesn't cover it, I'll give you some more when I get back.
2 denarii? That's more money than I make in a month.
So you see, which one was the man's neighbor?
I guess it was the man who helped him.
That's right. Now love the others just like the Good Samaritan did.
So many gifts today. What a bounty. You will tell your friends. You should. I sometimes say that Fountain Street Church might be a version of the Forrest Gump Church. You never know what you're going to get. But whatever it is, it will be nourishing if you're willing to let it nourish you. Well, a few words as the choir comes back in. This is my most important audience, you see. They have little notebooks. I'm preaching to the choir, yes. Of course, in some congregations like ours, they have a choir loft behind you, and I'm always a little leery of turning my back to the choir, too. Well, I'm especially grateful that we had such blessings of music today, such enthusiasms, because at least according to one poll I read this week, people are more pessimistic now than they were 2 years ago, and you know, they probably have good reasons. But I'm going to tell you that we don't generally stake our lives on bad bets. Maybe short selling will win you money, but it's not a way to live a life. We want to have a long-term bet, a long-term investment in life, because we know that we will not live just for tomorrow. But on the other hand, we don't want to live on fantasies of perfection. I know there are people who, go down to gaming places and bet the long odds, but they don't win very much. We like to win a little something, to have a sense that we will get ahead in life in some way, whatever that ahead means. And that's why what we do here every week is to try to find a piece, a small piece, but a real piece of hope, a piece of honest hope, a piece of honest faith, a piece of honest love. And that's why I always need your help, because the words I come up with are not mine, they're ours. If they work, they come from all of us, which is why I always ask that these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight and your sight, you who are my rock and my redeemer. Of course, if you're familiar with this place, you know that we are not a formally Christian church. That is to say, we don't say you have to be or need to be or ought to be. And so the question comes up, well, why do you do Easter? Christmas, too. I mean, if you ask a fellow who came to church a couple of weeks ago, he was visiting with us. He didn't know about us, so it was going to be a challenge for him. And for him to be a church meant it was a Christian community, and a Christian community means that you're loyal to Jesus as the Messiah, who was divine and who appeared on earth to reconcile us to God by offering himself as a sacrifice for the sins of all of us. Now, there's more to it than that, but almost all Christians give you some form of that story. And if that's what being Christian means, we're not. Because if you ask any Fountain Streeter, they'll get maybe 2 or 3 words into that, and they'll put a footnote or an asterisk or a qualifier in there. If they get that far into it, for that matter. And if that's what Christian means, then perhaps we should not do this Easter thing or this Christmas thing or this church thing for that matter. But we do it, which gives me only 2 choices: that we are either bald hypocrites and like pretending to be a church but not really making it hard, or that we really are Christians and are too chicken to admit it. These are 2 unpleasant choices. And when I had to put foot in front of the other, I can answer it, but I have to put an asterisk on it too. My answer is, yeah, we're Christians. It's the other guys who aren't. They are the unbelievers. And I'm going to make my case this morning, that they are the infidels and that we are the true followers of Jesus. Yes, I do mean that I, against 1 billion people, have a better idea. And in all probability, no matter how many YouTube hits we get, not one of them will say, I could have been at Fountain Street Church. But maybe a few of you will be quickened to think, maybe in a sense I am. And that will be worth it. Now, the good news is that Jesus gives me ammunition, if you want to call it that, in the parable of the Good Samaritan. So I want to take a look at that story with a little more precision, or at least detail. You know the story, of course, but what you might not remember is that a young lawyer comes to question Jesus and says, Jesus, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, do you follow the commandments? And the young lawyer says, all of them, yes. In fact, I know that the most important one is to love God as with all your heart and soul and being, to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, well, then you're good. That's essentially what he says. You're fine. It's the lawyer who says, but Jesus, wink, 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 who is my neighbor? And the lawyer is literally trying to catch Jesus, trying to trip him up. And that's when Jesus, sly dog that he is, says, there was a man who was going down the Jericho road. You notice how he doesn't answer the question. He tells a story. The parable that we just heard presented here by our character schoolers. And at the end of the parable, Jesus turns to the lawyer and says, and who was the neighbor? And the lawyer says, I guess the nice guy was. And it was meant to trip up the lawyer, to tell him that his neighbor is not the person nearest to him physically, but the one who is in need of him. And that's a great meaning. I love that meaning. We should all do that. Humanity trumps tribe. Neighbor is as neighbor does. It's a great lesson. But that's not the only lesson in the parable, and it's not the one I want you to take away, because you already have that one. For example, Jesus sets this up and says, 3 people come across the man who was robbed. And in a sense, he's almost telling a joke. He said, it's almost as though he said, a priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan went into a bar. And you know, when you hear 3 people named like that the fact that they're a priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan is significant. Now, we think we know what the priest and the Levite are all about. These are good guys, important people, rich people, powerful people who deftly step aside of the poor fellow lying in the road. And that's true, they do. And it makes them look like they're high and mighty and lofty and don't care about the poor. And maybe they don't, but that's not what the people who heard the story first were thinking. Because they knew that priests and Levites worked in the temple, and people who worked in the temple were prohibited to touch blood or dead bodies. And so they avoided touching the robbed man, not necessarily because they thought him icky, but because it would keep them from doing their job. Jesus is not mocking their haughtiness. He is mocking and challenging the society that it makes it hard for people to intervene with others, that puts barriers between us. To make this more current, have you ever been driving down a road and seen someone with a flat tire? How many times have you actually stopped? And why didn't you? When you had 100 good reasons. You were in a hurry. It was raining. There are people in the car. That person has a cell phone. I can't use a jack. We all came up with 100 good reasons. That's the point. There are always reasons not to help another person. There are always good reasons. Someone comes to your door, perhaps a young man, perhaps a man of color, offering to cut your lawn or shovel your walk. Do you do it?